Hello, my name is Hugh Paterson, and I am presenting today a paper titled A Vision for New Participation in OLAC, the Open Language Archive Community, subtitled Beyond an Agenda for Open Language Archiving. Today's presentation is part of a conference titled Language Documentation and Archiving, Where Do We Go From Here? Sponsored out of the Berlin Brandenburgische Akademie der Wissenschaften out of Berlin, Germany. And this paper is a paper that is a response to, but a paper given by Bird and Simons last year, in which they state that a new investment is required in order to move OLAC into the digital library's mainstream. And so I want to add to their statement with some specificity to help us grasp where we need to go, what we can do to further our community of practice in language resource stewardship and language resource discovery and language resource archiving. So the purpose of today's paper is to provide some of that specificity. And to do that, I want to look at user interfaces. I want to start off the conversation by looking at user interfaces that are needed to do resource stewardship. And I want to situate OLAC in this. So the first user interface that we know that we need to do good digital stewardship is a user interface for archive collection and resource management. And this is usually a web-based interface, but we talk about content management systems like DSpace and Content DM, Archive Space, Preservica. These are content management systems that archives use to do the stewardship work that they do. And this is usually a staff-facing user interface. And in contrast to that preservation staff interface, there's a user interface required for resource acquisition and collection building. So if the collections are housed at the archives, there's resources like Saymore and Lameta and even other applications that help scholars collect and manage metadata and collect resources and organize them appropriately. So that's a second kind of user interface that we need in this space. And the third one, there's been a lot of discussion about language communities accessing resources. And so we need user interfaces for ethnographic and ethno-linguistic community engagement. And those user interfaces may be different than other kinds of user interfaces that we see here. And there are specialized content management systems that would communicate with DSpace or Content DM, like Omeka and let me say this correctly, right? Mukurtu, and those content management systems allow for the display of information in other kinds of ways that might be more engaging for communities. And finally, we have this OLAC resource user interface and engagement to resources, and the user interface for OLAC is generally geared towards specialists. And these are an important component in the ecology of information that is in the process of developing information resources and understanding those resources and re-engaging them with communities. So the OLAC bridge is a very important component. And by focusing on the future of OLAC, I think, which is important, we can say that OLAC provides some value to archives by broadening their audiences. And there's a couple of really strong value statements that OLAC offers to archives. The first is the translation of content for Google Search and Google Scholar. Now, in my review of the code base, it doesn't currently do this, but it could do this, right? So it could put the Dublin Core tags in the headers of the pages to put the resources into Google Scholar. It could use SEO for like schema.org SEO and put that directly in there from the metadata that gets aggregated to OLAC. This would add value for reasons why archives should use and send their metadata to OLAC, right? It offers a specialized browsing experience that is generally oriented towards scholars. So when archives think about how they're going to spend their money and what kind of experience they're going to build for a user interface, some of that management interface is required for them to function. Now they have to think about their audiences. If they think about engaging those audiences through external software, exhibits, if you will, through Omeka or Mukurtu, then now they can think about, instead of building a user interface, they can think about using OLAC and collaborating with other institutions on building OLAC for specialist-oriented and looking at resources. So what this does is it allows data providers to focus their user engagement strategy and allocate their limited dollars to through better mutual collaboration. So I want to talk about the two things that, so the two technical improvements that would improve SEO at OLAC and raise the visibility of resources across the entire web would be to use HTTPS and to embed schema.org metadata on the web pages and have the values for schema.org directly pulled from the values that are provided in the OAI feeds from data providers. So I want to then just kind of look and say, okay, so if we really want OLAC to thrive and be well understood by specialists and community members, where that is where it becomes a reasonable gateway access point to resources, then we need to really think about expanding the network of data providers. I think Simons and Bird and Simons together, they said something like there's 62, 63 data providers currently, and they call them all archives. And I ask a critical question here: is everything an archive? I present here a typology that situates the data providers to OLAC across three broad categories: access institutions, collections and exhibits, and reference resources. There are some smaller categories there. In my slides, they're accessible and you can read those, but I'm not going to go over each and every one of them, as that is also the subject of a future talk at another conference. I have here broken into this typology 17 archives. I think of the 65 or so, 63 providers, we only have 2 academic libraries and 20 repositories and 14 typological databases. So we can see when we break apart the network this way that we have some components and some types of things that are aggregated quite easily or really well, and others we see there's room for growth. And so I think what this tells us is that there's room for more aggregation of exhibits and collections that are not part of access institutions, and that we've actually had a great deal of success looking at reference resources and integrating reference resources in a way that scholars can look at a variety of reference resources by language, by what their language component is. Now, we may think that 63 is a large number of participants, but I would like to point out that in my own research, I found 1,500 serials. These would be like journal serials that could and perhaps ought to be aggregated into OLAC. And additionally, just in my research, I found 260 cultural heritage institutions with language resources. So I keep a list of those in Google spreadsheets if people want to collaborate on that. But I think the ability to expand the offerings in OLAC is exponential. Now, another way to look at our social network is by the technologists who provide or connect these institutions to the OAI aggregator. In this diagram that I've put together, we can see that there are several sub-social networks, if you will, within the data providers. And there's some technologists that have really provided several data sources to OLAC. And there are other data providers I'm not quite sure how they're connected to the main network. But I think moving forward, if we really want to see the network grow, we need to focus our efforts on engaging technologists. This has been a known issue for OAI providers across other kinds of projects that use OAI and Dublin Core. And some of the lessons learned that in the published literature include that technologists often don't understand the technology. And so creating onboarding solutions for those that easily allow an institution to connect their existing repository to those to the OLAC OAI aggregator is going to allow our network to grow. So rather than targeting perhaps managers of institutions, we need to target technologists. Now, if we want to make a dent and bring in Mukurtu instances, I think there's about 100 language community instances out there. We could work with the developers of Mukurtu, and I know that Mukurtu is it's based off of Drupal, and I know there are other Drupal modules that, for instance, SIL International is using to provide its OAI connection to OLAC. So if those Drupal modules were, if a recipe was provided and that we had a conversation with those developers, this could be a whole set of exhibits that could be added to the language resources aggregated in OLAC. But if 100 sounds like an interesting number to you, I would really be encouraged to go there to add 100 new data sources. But I think we could do 400. An additional 400 in the OAI feeds of the Open Journal system. So Open Journal systems, there's several language and linguistic journals. In fact, Langsci Press uses OJS. And if we had a collaboration with OJS, which does provide an OAI feed, but to integrate the OLAC metadata, right? At OAI, it's using the Dublin Core stuff already. There's a mapping already in the software. There's just some additional fields that need to be there, and map that to their publication process. Then publishers like Langsci Press could publish their materials directly, an announcement about their materials or an aggregation of their materials directly to the OLAC service aggregator. And I think if we targeted DSpace, we could get an additional 1,500 repositories. So I think that targeting open source software and onboarding through technologists is the way to actually grow our network. One of the things that my analysis shows is that research libraries are underrepresented data providers. I have experience communicating with University of Hawaii, Manoa's library, the University Dallas International University, who are both data providers. They're the two research institutions that have libraries that have committed resources to OLAC in terms of records. And I also contacted University of Oregon, which has an extensive collection of indigenous community information resources that are available on the web. Their metadata is available. And I've asked them, each of these institutions, if they would like to update or if they had records they could share. And they've each said that they are in record sharing agreements with OCLC, and that prevents them from sharing with anyone else. So there's currently a legal lawsuit between Clavera and OCLC to liberate organizations like this from their binding agreements with OCLC, which provides their MARC metadata records and cataloging records for other parts of the library. So I know that European institutions aggregate to Europeana, and Europeana is an OAI Dublin core based aggregator of cultural heritage resources, much like OLAC, but OLAC focuses on language resources. The situation there, though, is that maybe there's a legal path forward or a template forward that we need to be able to present these larger institutions with a solution that has worked for other situations. So finding out more about that and presenting that to participating libraries and new research libraries would be a way forward to expand the network of institutions holding language resources. The final thing that I think that would increase the usability of OLAC is if we did some metadata curation on the server side. There are things like moving image where it's split. Maybe if somebody has a coordinate, then they could also get a Library of Congress subject heading for the country that coordinate corresponds to, and therefore increase the discoverability of a resource by taking what we know from the record and expanding it into equivalent metadata available through the Dublin Core standard and through standard translation of metadata into other components of enriching the record from the very small things that we know. This will give more access points to the record and allow it to show up when people search in different ways. This provides end user value. So the 5 takeaways, I think, for a better future for OLAC would be a better SEO of OLAC web pages, a more diverse recording of the more diversity in the network of data providers, targeted open source bridges at technologists, and research library participation and server-side metadata actions. Thank you for your questions. I'll take them